Yep, you're ready. Okay, so welcome to today's live coding session. Today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be building a to-do list application. I'm going to be using MVC and maybe the module pattern as well. This is going to be like a single page application which just renders a to-do list and has a simple text box that allows you to create a new to-do list, and maybe we could get to a point where you can click on something and delete the list too. So the only code that I have right now is a simple HTML page which looks like this, which is empty right now, and I have an empty JavaScript file. And notice that I'm loading the file at the end of the page. I could load it in the beginning, but I just have to use like document.onload, but I'm just going to avoid that. So
inside the body or outside? Does that matter?
It doesn't matter. It's just like it's the order in which it gets loaded. I could put it here too. No biggies. Cool. And the reason why you want this to be at the bottom is because some of my stuff is going to depend on this being loaded. Like my adding event handlers, for example. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is I want to work on the data side. Right? I want to like create some functions that will help me understand what is the shape of my to-do list and how do I sort of go about adding stuff to my to-do list. So right now I'm not going to be using any database. I'm just going to assume that all of the data is stored in memory. So a good way to go about that is, let's see, I would say var to-do list is an object, and I have items in a list, and I want to like keep that an object too, so that I can sort of get items out by ID. So it's like a key value association. And then I would have a function called get items that just returns this.items. And I have a function called add item. Which takes a task string and does some stuff with it. So it would be really nice if I keep track of the current count of the number of lists I have, rather not even the number, basically the number of times I've added an item, and I can incrementally like increase that every time I add a new item. So kind of like what a database does, like with your primary key. So every time you insert a row, it sort of increments the value of the thing. So that would be nice. And the other thing would be nice is if I have some sort of protection to my items. I don't want a way for somebody to directly manipulate this field. Right? Right now, I could basically say to-do list dot items equal to 0, for example. I could modify it, and that would break everything, right? Mm-hmm. So this is usually when you want to achieve things like that, when you want to like hide data, the module pattern is a pretty good thing to do here. So what you would do is you would create a function, and instead of it being directly an object, I would return that object. And then the items here would be not part of that object and just be made into a local variable inside the function. And I don't need to use this anymore. And I can just call that function. So pretty much the same result of what happened before, except now I have the ability of hiding this variable. Any questions so far? Cool. So now that I have a task string, oh yeah, so the other thing I wanted to do was maybe I have some sort of a current count. And that's 0. right? So every time I insert an item, I'm going to increment my current count. And so I'm going to say var item equal to an empty. I'm going to say item.task equal to task string. Item.id equal to current count. And then items of current count equal to item. And I'm going to also increment my current count. So what I've gotten so far is an ability to, okay, once I add items, I can also return, let's say, the items. So it looks nice. So I can say add, do the dishes, comma, right? So if I do these things, I should be getting some stuff.
Add item.
Oh yeah, thank you. So if I do these things, right? So let's try. So if I have node, what is this, to-do list? Cool. The first time it gave me this, and the second time it modified my internal variable and added the second task. So nice. I have a way of like sort of accessing my data. So I can also, one last thing I want to check, and then I'll answer your question, Jeffrey. So I could also do, actually I'm just going to call it items now. So since, actually get items is nice. Get items. So if I do this, so I have a way of accessing the items too. Yeah, question.
All I was going to say is if you want to make it increment immediately, if you put the plus pluses in front of current count instead of after it, the first item will be 1.
That's fine.
Oh.
I want it to be 0 based just because that's usually how, it doesn't matter. So long as like it is unique for each item, and you don't probably want to go, like every time you delete something, you don't want to reuse a previously used ID.
Okay.
That's the intention, but sure, I could change this to 1. I can start from 1 and it would give the same effect.
Would it make more sense to have it return just the item that was inserted instead of all the items?
Usually, from my experience, like I like to return the updated result set. So when I add something, I want to return like what does the new thing look like? Because then usually that's how the behavior is. Like when you add something in the future, you want to like get the most recent I guess contents of whatever you're trying to change, and then use that in another place. So if you directly return it when you add it, then you can sort of skip that call, because you already have the item that you're inserting, right? Cool. Right, so now we have a way to do the back end. So let's think of what we can do for the front end. So we will need some sort of so before that, let's look at what the index looks like. So I want a way to why is this highlighted in red? Oh, yeah, I want a way to basically have a clean way of accessing different parts of my DOM. Right, like, so I want to create like some sort of a layer which will let me access different parts. So like, for example, if I want to like see, get the button out, right? So it's like add task button, be a function, and it would just return, it would just, I just want to extract this piece out. So I would want to use document.query selector, I believe. new task button. So when I call DOM element.add task button, it will get me back the add task button. Similarly, this is the new task input field. It's a new task input field.
Why are you making the functions?
Because I'm going to probably use it many times, and I want to create an abstraction. So that way, if somebody in the UI decides to change it into like new task button div or something, I don't know, new task fancy button, let's say, like I only have to change one place. I only have to change one place.
I mean, like, why not just have the new task input field just be document type query selector the same instead of?
Can you repeat the question again? Why don't you have
like
instead of this line?
Yeah, like get rid of the arrow and the argument part. So it would just add task button would be a property, not a method, I guess.
Oh, I see. Because, okay, I guess for the button it may make sense, but it wouldn't make sense for the new task input field. I always want to get the current value, or the current DOM element. The DOM element is a stateful, like the DOM is stateful, right? The DOM can change.
Okay.
So you always want to get what is the current value of that DOM, which is why you need to make it a function. I want to execute this at the time when I need it,
I see.
not cache, like not,
When you're defining.
right.
I see.
Good question.
So that's lexical versus dynamic.
Okay, so now that we have DOM elements, let's create a controller which will do some stuff. So add items.
Event listener.
So add item. Yeah, this would probably have some event listener stuff happening. So it would take an event and the event would have let's console log event. Oops. So let's do DOM elements dot add task button dot add event listener click, and the function that I want to add is controller dot add item. Right? This is basically going to add this every time I click on the add task button. Let's see if that works. When I click on this, I'm getting an event. Sick. So what I want to do when I click on this is basically somehow I need the value of this, whatever's in here, right? Because that's what I need to use. That's the thing that I will need to actually populate the new item. So how do I do that? Usually what is a good way to do that is to find the parent of the current element which has been clicked, right? And then within that parent, find what you're searching for. You're basically going one level up and then going one and then searching for whatever you need. So in our case, we want to search for the new input task field, right? So you want to go one level up, which is probably going to go to body. And then in the body, I'm going to search for this thing. Since this is like a very basic app, like the HTML isn't too nested, but typically you may have like some sort of a nesting inside of this too, right? You may have some sort of a form or something. You know, this may be like class new task form, for example. And then, so when you go one level up, you're basically going to the container of the form, and then you're finding the element that you need. So it would look like so let button be equal to this. So I guess let's console log this. I think this is going to be the actual DOM element. Wait, how did I get two of these? Oh.
Delete that out.
Oh, interesting. Because it's an arrow function, that this has been rebound. Alright, see? So because we use, so whenever you're sort of working with events, do not use arrow functions. Use a regular function. Otherwise you'll lose access.
Back to the window.
Yeah, it had, using an arrow function, it rebounded it to the global object, which is the window. Cool. So then what I can say is
I've
that
also seen event.target.
Oh.
Would there be any difference?
yeah, I guess you can
between
use
this
that
or
too. Yeah,
event.target?
that's a great idea. I forgot about event.target. So we can say event.target. Let's see if both of them are the same thing. Yep, sweet. So then you can actually use an arrow function. Nice. I like arrow functions. So let's use event.target. So basically button is event.target. And then what we want to do is say button. So we'll say let input. Actually, you know what? We don't even need to do this because we have the new input field right there. Just thinking about it now. Maybe like in a more complicated app, you may have to do what I was doing. So maybe we can continue going down that road and then we can then replace it with this call. But what would happen is you would say the input field is equal to button element. I think there's something called parent element. So if I say DOM elements dot new or add button element, parent element. So parent element dot query selector. Oh, I think find elements. Oh, what is it? HTML DOM element find element by class. Maybe it's find element by class. Okay, maybe get element by class. Where did it go? Get element by class name. Okay. What is? Can I use query selector? Okay, I can use query selector. So I can then just say dot. But then again, this. Yeah. So I could do this. So I could say dot query selector. It's a new task input field. But the problem with this again is like you are hard coding this in here. Instead, what you want is you want to create an abstraction. Right? So if somebody, the reason why we created this abstraction here is so that you don't have to use this class element in like every place that you're going to call this this value. Which is why the best thing to do is just say input field is equal to DOM elements dot new task input field. Actually, what I can do is not value. And I don't even need this. So let's console.log. Cool. We're getting stuff out. Right, so at this point, what I want to do is I want to then call to-do list dot add item with task, and then let's console.log to do. I can just console.log this. Cool. So we're basically able to change our to-do list. So now notice that we have a nice controller, we have a nice way to like update the data layer. So now we need some sort of a view layer, right? Let's have some sort of a UI. So the UI would also have a same function called add item, or we could actually have a function called, let's say, what is the word? Build to-do list, or refresh to-do list. It is a function that will take all the items, right? You want your function to basically get all the data that it needs as an argument, and then what you would do with that is basically say items HTML. So you'd want to like build an HTML for each of the items. So items at this point is going to be the object, right? So you want to like map each object. So object.values will give me all of the actual items. .map, and it'll give me an item. And then what I want is I want to build like some HTML. So if you look at how our HTML looks, the items are going to be rendered in a table, right? And we for each item we need to build a row for a row in that table. So we'll have to use like tr and then td item dot id, because that's the first row here, or rather the first column, and then do the same for the other column. So it's item dot task. So that's going to give us a list of strings, and then I want to join those strings with a new line. So I get like a full string, and then what I want is I need to set the value of the tasks body to be whatever this HTML is. So I need another sort of abstraction to get the tasks body out. So I can say tasks table body is document.query selector tasks body. So then I would say DOM elements dot tasks table body dot inner HTML is equal to items HTML. Right, so at this point, after I add my item, I'm going to refresh my UI. So UI dot refresh to-do list, and let's see if that works. Wash hands. Nope. So let's see. So cannot convert undefined. Oh, so I need to pass it some value. I forgot to pass it. Refresh to-do list needs items. So I could just do to-do. Oops. This is what I was saying, that if you capture the items here, then you can just pass it in here instead of calling that function. So, and our wash face. Nice. Cool. That works. Wash face, then wipe face, hopefully. So that's sort of adding stuff in there. So I'm going to pause at this point. Any questions?
So the convention of using capital letters for classes,
Mm-hmm.
are you
Yeah.
using a different convention or?
No, I'm using the same convention. I just like call, like, yeah, this could potentially be small UI, but it just looks weird, which is why I call it UI. But
I mean,
notice,
the first letter, like to-do list, for example.
yeah. Classes have like capital letters for like different words. I guess to-do list is a single word.
No, I
To-do
mean,
list
like
is two separate
I'm just
words.
talking about the first letter,
Yeah, so the first letter is capital, right? Everywhere? You see
but
it?
it's
No.
not, it's not a class, right?
Oh, I see. You're saying like, why have I made it capitals?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like a class in a way.
Constructor.
It's more like, in this case, it happens to be like a module, and every module is also sort of differentiated from a variable. Regular variables are all lowercase, whereas when you're saying that it's some sort of a domain or a module, you usually upcase the first letter.
Okay.
Good question.
Is there a most popular style of designing your code?
Is there a popular style of designing your code?
Yeah, like this is using the modular pattern, but you could also do it a number of different ways. Like,
Yeah, sure, totally. But I think this is one of the most nice and clean ways to do it. Everybody has opinions on what is nice and what's not. This is I've seen a lot of like good developers write code like this, where you're separating concerns. Yeah.
What
Steve.
is the use case we would do this versus the other ways you've shown us as far as constructing like a node app?
Like a node application?
I'm asking like when would we use this pattern versus not use this pattern?
Okay. The question is when is a good use case for this pattern versus not using this pattern. So this is useful when you have like a single page application and a lot of like your logic lives on the front end,
Oh, I see. Okay.
right? So a lot of like your rendering logic, for example, is on the front end. So it's very easy if you don't use like a good separation of concerns. It's very easy to like munge everything together. Notice that there's like add item function in many places. Like the same add item function is here. There's one here, and potentially there could be one here too. Right? I could have an add item here. So if I did not explicitly think about the separation of concerns, it's very likely that I could have put in all the logic of the add items all in one place. And that would have been very hard for me to change and modify. Because right now, if I want to modify my UI, like if I want to change it from a table to something else, I only need to modify this function. There's a nice clean separation. Like I don't have to worry about what is the internal representation of, like I don't have to even look at this code that much. Maybe I do have to look at it in order to know what are the items in there, but that's pretty much it. Does that make sense? Sorry, I'm just going to
Yes.
hang on to this.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Jeffrey, do you have something?
oh yeah, is this similar to like Redux? What Redux does, like mapping properties from the state stuff?
Which line are you talking about?
The UI part.
I don't think so. So Redux is like a way to like store all your state in one place.
Oh, okay.
This is in this application we just have one place to store state, which is here.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a super simple application. Like you may have like different places to store state,
Mm-hmm.
and that also gets a little complicated
Wow.
because then you have state available at different points.
Mhm.
And different functions can change the state, which is why like Redux solves that problem by like sort of grouping all, and accumulating all the state in one single place.
Mhm.
And there's only one source of truth for all your information. John?
So how does this pattern fit into larger applications? For example, you said that this is the MVC pattern for the front end. Would this go, like, what does the file structure look like of a large application with this implemented?
Yeah, so you could potentially have different folders for each of your, so you would have a views folder or a UI folder which would have like UI slash to-do list, right? Or you would have, let's say the application was, so give me a more complex application. Let's say it was Facebook, right? So it was like, so you had a page for like users, you had a page for posts. Let's say there were two different entities in your system. And let's say you were using this to solve that problem. You would potentially have different files that would have different the different pieces. So you would have a separate folder for UI, you would have a separate folder for your controller, and you would have inside your controller folder, you would have a folder for a file for user, you would have a file for post. Similarly, you would have a file for the UI file for user and a UI file for post.
Okay, so I guess my question is still, when at the root of our application, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have an MVC pattern as well, right? We have
You
like
mean
a
on the
database
back
calls.
end? You mean on the back end?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we have like, so all of the front end stuff usually would go into the views on that level, on the root level, right?
Mhm.
And then we can implement this on inside that level as well. I guess
Yeah.
that's my question.
Absolutely.
And okay.
So think of it as like when you're doing client-side rendering, you kind of are dropping the view on the backend. Right? The backend is just becomes the model and the controller, and the controller is nothing much but like just like making calls to your model to get data out. Right? So that's when you have client-side rendering. So that's why the V shifts onto the client side, and then you can do MVC on the client side, in a way.
So it's one or the other.
It's one what?
Is it one or the other? Or I'm just having a
back end,
little
MVC
bit.
front end, right?
Right.
Okay.
Sure, you can say that.
Yeah, model
MC
control.
backend, and you kind of like are dropping because of the rendering happening on the front end. There's no UI code on the back end.
So
Is
pass
that different than server side rendering?
Yeah. So on the server side, every HTTP request is actually going to return HTML.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So when you're just doing client-side rendering, you're just returning the data that will be then used by the front end to actually render like your. So think of it like a React application. Like so in your React applications, all of the rendering happens on the front end. You only have an API that React integrates with. Your front end makes calls to the back end to fetch data for your app. So in the case of a to-do list, you would do the same thing where you would just make an API call to fetch all the to-do lists, and then you would get back a JSON list of your to-dos, and then you would use that list to build like your front end.
Okay.
Right? So this is pretty much that.
Okay.
This is like raw JavaScript, but like client-side rendering.
That makes sense. Is client-side rendering preferred in the industry?
Totally.
Totally.
Because
okay.
it's much faster, right? Like the response time is much faster. You don't have to like wait. Which is why you use frameworks. You end up using React or like Angular or some other frameworks, but it is much preferred because the apps are more responsive.
Fast.
And if you're faster, you're just going to make more money as a company, because you don't want users to be waiting and getting frustrated.
Better UX.
Yeah, a better UX, exactly.
PhantomJS is like a
That's when you did like the map by ID. Okay, that makes sense.
MC, model controller only.
PhantomJS is a testing library, so I don't know what you mean by what is PhantomJS.
Phantom's just a testing library?
Yeah. I mean, it's a headless. It offers a headless browser so that you can run your tests against, right?
Uh-huh. That was just what I'm, yeah.
Any other questions?
So we should build all our apps with client-side rendering. Theoretically.
Not
There's like no use. Is there a use case for server-side rendering?
It depends on the context. If you're like quickly want to like hack something together, you can use server-side rendering where your performance doesn't matter that much, and it's not going to be like hundreds of thousands of users using your application.
Mhm.
So that time server-side rendering is fine,
Okay,
right?
but,
Because it's much easier. There's
but-
lesser code you have to write.
yeah, and if we were to expand the app and we say we getting more users, we want faster response time, we would shift over to client-side rendering.
Yeah.
So,
So like for example, at the guild, if you're making like Coach Q or like the curriculum app, there's no reason for it to be like super responsive and like super glamorous and super fast, right? There's only like 100 or 150 users of the application. It's okay to like wait and not. So it's kind of like a trade-off, right? Like how much resources do you have to spare versus what is the payoff of that effort?
And the reason is server-side rendering is easier to read, I guess, for us as developers, generally.
Sure, it's like a simpler code base.
It's
Yeah.
simpler, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the trade-off. Simpler versus more responsive.
Mhm.
Okay.
with like with server-side rendering though, is that like similar to like CMS systems at all? Like having an interface to be able to.
CMS system is just a system which is serving some content. How it serves it is up to the system. It can be server-side or it could be client-side.
Oh, okay. Well, could you do the same thing if you had if you built an app that was like a CMS and you wanted to design how somebody interfaces with the.
Sure, yeah.
So you could do MVC for both.
What do you mean?
Like remember how we said on the back end we didn't do the view portion, but we could do the view portion.
I mean,
on
if you're
both.
doing client-side rendering, then you wouldn't have a view portion in the back end. If you're doing server-side rendering, then you wouldn't have a view portion on the front end.
Well, I guess I think the thing I'm thinking about is if you wanted to build a WordPress, for instance, where it renders.
Yeah, so WordPress does server-side rendering.
Oh, well, I guess the forms are showing up in the server. That makes sense. Okay.
Is there any risks to doing client-side rendering? Like for example, if you use a different client, like a different browser, can things be evaluated in a different way? Or does that make your code have
For
to be
sure.
more tough?
Yeah, like JavaScript is definitely behaves. I mean, things are starting to get a little bit more like converging because of the standards, but for sure, there's different behavior across different browsers. So you have to make sure that it's tested on each browser. It's a lot more overhead when you have when you're using a lot of JavaScript
Okay, and
on the front end.
On
When
the
you're
front
using
end.
a lot of JavaScript on the front end, yeah.
on the front end, and then all the node is just whatever node you use.
Right, that is on the back end. So you control like which software that you're running on the back end because
Yes.
you're in complete control of the server and the software that the server runs. But you're not in control of which browser the user is going to open your app in, right? So if somebody was to open it in using Internet Explorer 8 because they have that computer, your app may not work that well. But if you have server-side rendering, it may work because HTML is pretty standard. Most of the HTML stuff would work. Like HTML5 may not work, for example, but
Is there a way where you could have? No, that wouldn't work. Right? If you were to have like a backup, if client-side rendering doesn't work, then go to server-side rendering. No, because the responses would be different, right? Response objects would be different. Is that?
I mean, you could do that. You can like detect the version of the browser, and based on that, you could so your backend would have to have different routes for different. It would have to have client-side rendering routes as well as the server-side rendering routes.
Oh, okay.
So you could do that too.
That seems like very expensive.
Yeah,
process.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It just it depends on how much money are you going to make if you support this feature versus you don't support this feature. If it's a profitable thing to do that, then you will do it,
Mhm.
right? Cool. So I guess I could maybe add another feature at this point since we only have about 15 minutes left. Well, what does the group think? What would be most useful to do? Did this make sense? Is everyone on board?
Yeah.
I know this side has been pretty quiet. What's
Yeah.
going on here?
Add Casper to it.
No, I said the biggest thing was just literally seeing what it would look like if you pulled this apart into files.
Probably,
Like,
if you didn't used to like work up.
because I'm thinking like a folder for model, a folder for view, and a folder for controller, and then like separate folders for each
To look at.
page or.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see that too, because separate thinking files is different when you're working on the front end versus the back end, right?
Mhm.
With how you import. them.
Yeah, so you'll have to use something like Webpack, right? So you create a Webpack, and then you would have an entry point, and then you would have to require all those files. You're kind of like, if you've ever worked with a React application, it would be kind of like that. So you have an initial entry point, which would then require all the other files, and it would build this bundle.js. Which I can do, but I guess it's out of scope of this talk because it would take a while for me to do that. But that makes sense. I can do that as the next continuation of this talk. But does that make sense? So like you could split it into as many folders as you want in different files, so long as you make those connections, and then you will use Webpack to create a bundle for all those different files. And that bundle.js will be a combination. So to you, it'll look like there's different files, but to the browser, it'll look like it's one file. And then you would just have to load bundle.js here. So it's better. So what it gives you is better organization from your perspective as a developer. But from a user standpoint, it makes no difference.
Because by the time it reaches the browser, it's just like a static.
Yeah, it's like a single file. Right.
Okay.
So these are internal, like these are dev tools, right? Like Webpack is a dev tool that helps you as a developer write cleaner code, separate code. But from an end user's perspective, you want to only load one file, for example, because it's much faster to just like get one file instead of making like 10 different requests for different files.
No, can we just skimp on the Webpack and just put everything in one file, but separate it in the MVP pattern?
No, that wouldn't work.
It's like no bundle.
You just
Already,
comment,
it's in one
comment,
file.
model,
Yeah.
comment,
Yeah.
view.
Yeah, that would be painful. It would get hairy pretty quickly.
So technically, I guess you can't. But.
Yeah. I've been doing
Don't.
it- I've been doing it right all along.
All right, I'm gonna stop here then.